Hello and welcome back. Eddie Radosovich, George Stoy here from the SoonerScoop.com studios. Welcome back to the SoonerScoop.com YouTube page. A second practice report, as we told you. We wanted to get a little bit more big picture. Got Josh McCuistion down in Houston at Scoop HQ, down in the southern tip of Texas, I think would probably be the best way to say it. But welcome in, Josh. First practice report.
Yeah, obviously muted myself, so terribly nervous.
There we go.
Very worried about this. Hopefully don't mess up the momentum you two have going here lately.
No, it's going to be a good one because there is some portal stuff on the back end, and Oklahoma already setting up a visit with a offensive lineman, which is of interest to a lot of people. So let's jump right into it. First time that we talked to Brent Venables, we recapped kind of the quick hitters on Tuesday. George and I did, but he did talk about Zach Alley. Oh, by the way, Oklahoma has a new defense coordinator in Durbin. And all things considered, George, you talked to him. You asked the question. Seems like it has been a pretty smooth transition.
Yeah, I think that it's been interesting hearing from a lot of the players say, having Zach out there, it's kind of like having another Brent Venables. But in the way that he coaches, sometimes he simplifies it. I think we heard that from Danny Stutzman and in the way that he explains the game, explains what they're doing defensively. Obviously, he's kind of brought his own touch on what they're doing. It sounds like maybe they're putting some new stuff in that they weren't doing. I think they're running kind of the same scheme. So it's been interesting to see Zach out there and how he interacts with the players. And then obviously hear from Brent and say, yeah, he's been a huge help in terms of teaching these guys and kind of taking the reins on defense.
Here is Brent Venables a couple weeks in now with Zach Alley as his defense coordinator.
A lot of players said Zach's almost like a clone out there of you, and that he sometimes maybe teaches things a little bit differently, and they understand it maybe in a different way. How big of a help has he been so far, just teaching some of those guys?
Yeah, no, it's I'm sure there's how we call things. I think scheme-wise it's pretty much the same, but how we call things, maybe in families, to make it make sense. When you have to leave. Just like when I left Oklahoma after the 2011 season, I had to start over. I got into a room, and nobody knew what I knew. Nobody. And one of the hardest things I've done from a professional standpoint. And I couldn't take my relationships, my trust, all my expertise, football acumen. I had to start over. And then the language barrier. There's whatever it was. There's 80 staff and defensive players. And that I had to teach them, and so if that was not, I had to figure out what they knew, and I didn't have anybody helping me. I didn't take anybody with me, and so I say that, Zach doesn't necessarily have that, but when he did leave several years ago and got out of, our football building, and he had to go to several places and start over and build something from scratch and teach everybody around him, I think he probably learned maybe even more efficient ways to do it. And so he's been able to give, some of those shortcuts, if you will, to help expeditiously, develop our players, teach our players. And so we've had a little bit, some new language, some new things to go in, but just reorganizing, I think, is that we cleaned the pantry out and we threw away stuff that that we didn't need anymore, and we reorganized it. And so now all the cereals are on the far right, on the bottom two shelves. They're not spread out, and that's where they belong. And just keep things nice and tidy.
Brent Venables, big cereal guy apparently, didn't have expeditiously on the bingo card either to be pulled out during a football post practice. But Josh, it does sound like, and I know that on the recruiting side, it's been a bunch of positives. It seems like Zach Alley is fitting in quite well around the Oklahoma program.
Oh, I don't think there's any question, guys. I mean, you talk to, even recruits. We all know, the players know Brent Venables really well. They've been around him for several years now. They kind of know what he's about. So when they're talking about Zach Alley having a lot of commonality with him, that makes sense. That they are, I guess they're experts on the topic, so that it's easy for them to talk about. But even recruits who've had a few conversations with Brent Venables, maybe in that interim period where we were all waiting to hear Zach Alley's announcement, they talk. I mean, they're like, it's hard to pick up where one stopped talking, where the other one, left off. So I think there's just a really easy continuity. And I have to agree. I love, not only did he start with the pantry analogy, but he just kept it going. He made it work the whole way through. And I got to say that as a guy who loves a good analogy, but is not very good at them, I appreciate it.
It makes me think that the Venables home is one of those cabinets that you or the pantries that you reach in and everything is labeled. Everything is has its spot, right?
Yeah, definitely. What kind of cereal do you think he's eating? Fruit Loops?
That's a good question. I'm so far out of the cereal game.
Captain Crunch?
I don't. Lucky Charms
Lucky
is what I'm
Charms.
being told by Carrie Murdoch. Lucky Charms.
Kerry also thought Gentry Williams was practicing yesterday on the unofficial 40. So
Fair enough. That's a bunch of expletives in my ear right now. Yeah, about to go to a one shot. It's about to be just me and you, Josh. We need to zoom in on one of these cameras. George, there is a certain level of buy-in that I think that we've talked about really truly since day one, when one of the first springs that we were able to get out there. But when you're bringing in as many freshmen as they brought in and as many guys through the transfer portal that are expected to be contributors, it's important from day one this spring to get a good amount of buy-in from not only the new faces but the returning players as well.
it's crazy to think. I wrote a story today actually that OU has 79% of its returning production on defense coming back, and that's the best in the SEC, 8th best in the country. So when you talk about experience, OU's definitely going to have it, and those guys are certainly bought in. I mean, they've stuck through the program the last 3 years, but you mentioned all the new guys. I think having those new guys come in and learn from some of those experienced guys, at Danny Stutzman, obviously Billy Bowman, those are the two that stick out, but even a DJ Terry and Ethan Downs, all these guys that have played a lot of football, Woody Washington, I think that you're seeing that, and then you talk about the competitive depth, the talent they've brought in, whether it's through recruiting and the defensive line up front, David Stone and Jaden Jackson, Nigel Smith, all those guys that we know about, but also the transfer portal at Des Malone, those type of guys. It's just this defense is in a different category than what we've seen in recent years.
Specifically for Brent Venables going into his third season in Norman, George asked him on Tuesday, is this about where he wants this thing to be?
Spots it is. At spots it is. And, overall we do have another year in the system. And I just look at all the systems. I think it's important. And starting with just, again, the excitement that you need to have, the passion that you need to have, the focused intensity that you need to have, whether you're in segment meetings, team meeting, or you come to this practice field, if it's a walkthrough or if it's a 2-minute drill to win the game. All of it should require the same level of passion and intensity and the focus. And just, again, having a group of guys that are obsessed with the physical toughness, obsessed with developing, our team, obsessed with the details, obsessed with, having the right mindset every single day, and competing and winning. I want our guys to try to create as much competition as we can, and I want our guys to understand the value of winning and losing. And it should matter. Everything should matter. And we're going to grade every play from practice, and you should be incredibly disappointing if you don't get a winning grade at practice every single day. You want to be somebody that develops trust during this time of the year. You want to be somebody that develops your own toughness mentally and physically during this time of the year. And then you develop great habits. Goals and things like that are great for setting direction, but your habits and your guts, your will being stronger than your skill, your will and your habits are what's going to determine, whether or not you're successful. And I want our guys to really buy into that.
We've talked a lot about the leadership within this team, and I think that when you look at the defensive side of the football, particularly, Josh, I know that it's something that we've talked about on the unofficial 40. It's something that Georgia and I have talked about as well. They have a little bit of a leadership core at every level of the defense, whether it be, starting in the middle with Danny Stutzman at the linebacker group. You have Billy Bowman and Woody Washington on the outside. DJ Terry up front has certainly been kind of a captain of that defensive line position group. It has to be a little bit of an easier process knowing you have so many returners, like George said, with the 79% coming back from last year's team.
Oh, yeah. I mean, and obviously when you compare it to, and I think it helps so much that these are not, guys that have come in from the portal. These are guys that have been there the whole time. I mean, obviously DJ Terry is an exception, but you throw in Ethan Downs, defensive end, a guy with a ton of experience that, a lot of those guys look to. There's there's something to be said for these guys have kind of paid their dues. They've earned their way with this coaching staff. And if I do the same stuff, I can follow in those same footsteps. And I think it's also telling how much ownership this coaching staff has given a lot of these guys. When you see guys like Danny Stutzman and Billy, you guys have talked a lot about Billy Bowman almost just coaching out there this spring, teaching a lot of these young safeties. And that's how you build. We keep talking about that competitive depth. That's how that happens, because it's not just, oh, this guy's really talented, because we know any guy that Brent Venables is bringing in on that defense, they are talented football players. But how can they learn this really complex system, and and kind of how quickly can they get up to speed?
Brent Venables explains a little bit of that and a little bit more on just kind of the leadership core that Oklahoma has.
No, but I love the leadership on our defense, the returning players. I got several guys that have a mindset like, coach me like a freshman coach. Coach me like I know nothing, and I love that. Sign me up for that. And having the humility, first of all, as opposed to, this is my third or my fourth year. Y'all lucky to have me back. I wouldn't tolerate that stance, but I love. I got a three deep of guys that are like, I need to be coached. Again, I came back with purpose. I need to get better, and so the humility, the focus, the toughness, the leadership. They recognize that they're in leadership positions, and everybody's watching them. How they talk, how they practice, how they lead. Everything matters. So I got great respect and appreciation for that on both sides of the ball. Maybe it's a Jalil Farouk. On offense, or it's the growth and development of a guy like Jaden Gibson, or it's the buy-in and the toughness of a guy like a Bauer Sharp that just got here. And, man, he's trying to earn the respect of his teammates, or, Deion Burks, these guys that are showing up here with a sense of desperation. But I see it from lots of guys, guys that are returning, and guys that just got out of here, out of high school, David Stone and Jaden Jackson, amongst others. They're, that group of young defensive linemen, man, they live in that building. They're in between classes, at night, after practice. They just want to get better. They want to have a role, and they're trying to develop that. So the hunger and the edge, and again, they're amongst several guys, several offensive linemen. Really excited about young guys like a Heath Ozida, and again, Logan Howland. I talked about him, Josh Bates. Man, we ain't got a tougher guy out here than Josh Bates. Man, he's a football player.
I think back to those first couple of weeks when Brent was kind of starting his program, George, and you think back to the comments that we're talking about, player-led programs. It's coming to fruition here. I know it's been kind of a weaving and winding path to get here, but it seems like the third year there is a little bit of stability, and I think it helps when you're coming off of a year that, albeit probably was a little bit disappointing on the back end in the losses in Lawrence and Stillwater, but at the same time help kind of steady the ship here as we enter the third year, which is obviously going to be a pivotal, interesting, intriguing type of season in the SEC.
I think one of the biggest signs of the buy-in is the amount of guys that opted to come back. And you heard Brent talk about those guys in the sense of, hey, these guys said, hey, I know I have to get better and I need to come back. A Danny Stutzman, a Billy Bowman, those are the two that come to top of mind. Jalil Farouk, I mean, that's a guy in the past that maybe probably would have gone to the NFL draft. A DJ Terry. These are guys that Woody Washington, like all these players a few years ago, you would have said, oh, they're probably going to leave early. They're going to forego their senior year. And you saw it. That's how Clemson kind of built their program. Sure. When Brent was there, and obviously under Dabo, is they had guys stay 4 years. And I think that's where you're seeing sort of that buy-in is this senior leadership, these guys that want to come back and better themselves, but also are investing in the program and believe in what Brent Venables is selling.
And Josh, I think that we've seen that just in terms of what they're selling on the recruiting trail from almost day one when Oklahoma was able to keep together a top 5 class coming off a 6 and 7 season. I think that there was, probably a good reason for the concern from amongst the fan base if they were going to be able to keep that thing together. But they did. It was another example that there is something that Oklahoma is selling, or something that Brent Venables particularly is selling to the recruiting side of things.
You're right, Eddie. And what's amazing is you talk about, all the things that Brent talked about when he arrived. all those things have become infinitely more difficult to achieve in this era of college football. Player-led, continuity, culture. All those things are tougher when your roster is just constantly churning. And, I think they've done a really good job of finding their way to make that work, and it's going to be a little different from program to program, but I think they really have done a nice job. And George is exactly right. 3 or 4 years ago, Danny Stutzman, Billy Bowman, and probably Jalil Farouk are not on this roster. I don't think there's any question that would be different. So I think that's a sign of them doing this. And then when you look to recruiting, guys, I had clear skepticism, and I still, have my questions about the overall ideas of the way they want to do the commitments, and you can't commit until you're ready to be done with it and all that. And that's fine, but they've made it work. I mean, there's just no question that, and I think it does. And I think that's probably the thing that I didn't take enough account of, is how much that sets them going forward. Like, this is the idea. You're bought in. You're with us. Like, you're part of this deal. We're all going forward together. And I think that is something that part of that recruiting helps funnel. I don't know if the right guys is the way to say that, but it does kind of set up this idea of we're all in this together even before the guys have hit the roster.
One of the big question marks for Brent Venables from day one when he took over the Oklahoma program was going to be how they were going to even coordinate the transfer portal. That's certainly been a big player for Oklahoma over the last couple cycles. I think anybody that follows Oklahoma football would be the first hand up to say that it has been a big player for Oklahoma. The spring portal will open at the beginning of May. On Tuesday, Brent Venables was asked how they're going to handle the spring portal.
Yeah, well, you just got to stay ready, I think, is the biggest thing. You got to, so if that means that you're certainly always assessing your own team and, where you're at, and you're hoping that everybody stays, but that's not, likely in this environment. And so you just be ready and prepared to adjust when it happens, and be proactive from, what that's going to look like and where your needs might be, and being prepared based on what, from an availability standpoint, who might be available. And a lot of that you don't know. And so, again, if it was the NFL, who's getting ready to be a free agent. So you can have like a real board that says, all right, these are the free agents. Well, that window is a small window, so you try to stay aware in college football. But I'm not going, it's always about finding and meeting our needs of this team 130, and addressing those first. So in many ways, it's kind of simple, but there are some preparation things that, you have a staff that is always prepared. They understand the landscape of college football and who's doing what.
They've certainly identified some needs, or at least we've identified some needs. I think it's been common knowledge, George, just in terms of they need help on the defensive line, especially in the interior. They need help on the offensive line, particularly with the injury to Troy Everett. We've already identified one of those names, and you put something up on the Crimson Corner on Wednesday night. Oklahoma already has at least one visitor headed into Norman for the spring game weekend, Branson Hickman from SMU.
Yeah, I put it up on the Crimson Corner last night. Great time to sign up. $1 Sooner Scoop for 1 month. But, he is a guy that has started 33 games for SMU, has been their starter their last 2 years, started 7 games as a true freshman at SMU, and a guy that, is he going to be the most talented center in the world? Probably not, but he is a guy that I don't think it's going to be really difficult to find someone with that amount of experience in the transfer portal that can come in and immediately help Oklahoma. So, he's limited his schools down to, I think it's TCU, Arkansas, and UCF, which he's already visited. And then he's planning to visit Ole Miss and obviously, like you said, Oklahoma spring game weekend. And what's interesting, too, Indiana defensive lineman Philip Belidi, he is also coming in for spring game weekend for Oklahoma on the defensive line. So 2 big names, 2 guys that I think Oklahoma would like to add. I'm sure they'll also see who else maybe pops into the portal when it opens up officially in May in the spring. Those 2 guys have already been in the portal since January. So, again, I do think you're right. They're going to be looking, and I think that Hickman is certainly somebody at the top of their list.
Josh, with Hickman, he's a McKinney, Texas, I guess native from the DFW area, went to Jesuit. high school down there, Jesuit Prep in the DFW area. Shout out Jordan Spieth the week before the Masters. In terms of Hickman overall, is this a situation that, like, beggars can't be choosers in a way? Oklahoma needs depth because of the number situation that they have up front.
Well, and in so many ways, he actually makes a lot of sense for Oklahoma, because for all the things that we can talk about with this offensive line, experience is what they really need. I mean, and with what we hear about Heath Ozida and the possibility of him being the starter at left guard, having a guy with a lot of experience in there next to him, and I think that makes it a little easier. That's a little easier for a guy like him to walk in rather than, he's this really talented young guy where they're still having to gel all these pieces together and you're still having to teach him the position. And I'm not saying he doesn't have plenty to learn and all these things, but he walks in with a level of confidence, with a level of understanding of just what that position is about. He's not going to be, the first snap of the game, concerning himself with just, I can't believe I'm here kind of stuff. Like, he's done all this. It's very rote for him. So I think that is, I think he makes a lot of sense. Now, again, I think Brent Venables is absolutely correct in that you don't know what's going to be there. So you don't want to jump and get too aggressive yet until you kind of know what the marketplace looks like. But center is, guys, we know it. We talk about this every year. There's a reason you have to recruit so well on the offensive line and defensive line, because there's not that many guys that can play at the level you need just available in the portal.
Sure. I also wonder, I would assume they're somewhat familiar with each other in terms of Hickman and the staff. I think that obviously Hickman played OU last year here in Norman, but being from kind of that DFW area, I wonder if Seth Luttrell had recruited him when he was at North Texas.
Sure.
I don't know that for sure, but you would think that he's at least been on his radar.
No doubt. It's going to be interesting here over the next couple of weeks to see how not only the rest of the spring unfolds for Oklahoma, but most certainly the transfer portal, which is going to be, I think, by all intents and purposes, it's a feeling amongst the college football world that it's going to be a very busy portal season here over the next couple of months when it opens beginning of May, correct?
Yeah, I think it's May 1st through May 15th. And, you and I have talked about it, Eddie, but it's not always just who's OU going to add, but who could they lose?
Sure.
You never know. I mean, there's definitely
especially
some
when you're
positions.
talking about the positions of depth.
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely positions, receiver, corner, safety, linebacker. Like, you've got some positions at Oklahoma where you've got a lot of guys that aren't going to be able to see the field. So wouldn't be shocked if some spots open up there too.
Maybe it'll be a little bit more than just 1-1 in terms of talking about intake portal on the defensive and offensive lines. Josh, we appreciate you joining us today. It's been a lot of fun catching up here on a practice report. We will be back at it, at the beginning of next week when we can hopefully get back into practice. Maybe even talk to Zach Alley. I know that this would be the fourth week of spring football. At some point, you would think that we're going to be able to talk to the defense coordinator.
Maybe. We'll see.
Maybe.
It might be next fall when we get to talk to him, but I hope we get to next week.
Maybe we'll set up a golf date with him and we'll just do it out there.
He is a heck of a golfer.
At Jimmy Austin. Yeah. Handicap, I think 3. So we'll see. We appreciate it. Thanks for joining us here on the SoonerScoop.com YouTube channel. Another practice report, another week for Oklahoma in the books. They will be back out onto the scrimmage field, I believe, Thursday. And they're actually, as Brent said, they're going to be practicing on Saturday as well. So make sure you're checking the Crimson Corner for some scrimmage tidbits and notes, things coming out of Oklahoma's, I guess what would be technically second big scrimmage of the spring. So until next time, for Josh, for George, I'm Eddie. We'll see you right back here for the SoonerScoop.com studios on the SoonerScoop.com YouTube channel.